Hello, good afternoon. How are you today? Well, we have a panel today of very fantastic guests. I'm Steve Pagliuca from Bain Capital, and many more of you know me from the Boston Celtics. A lot of Boston Celtics fans here in Saudi Arabia, which is fantastic every time I come. We have a wonderful panel today. Hans-Paul Buerkner, from CEO of the Boston Consulting Group of many years, to my left. To my right, we have Jim Turley, CEO and Chairman and Chief Executive of Ernst & Young, the global firm. And right over here, we have Nandini Vaidyanathan, founder and mentor of CARMA. Our panel today is really going to talk about our experiences over many years in business and life in general on an interesting subject. How do you take risks? How do you dare to be great? How do you promote that in your organizations? Because organizations that don't take risks don't succeed. But obviously there's a very high cost of perceived failure. So how do you foster that spirit of entrepreneurship in risk-taking? And why don't we start with a few remarks from Hans to my left here.
Thanks very much, Steve. When I first saw the title of the panel, The Art of Failure, I thought there's something wrong. I mean, obviously, failure is not an objective. It is not good to fail, and it should certainly not be an aspiration for anybody. But failure is part of life, and I think we all need to learn how to live with failure and how to learn from failure. Now, I would say we can always forgive ourselves for failing at times. We cannot forgive ourselves for not trying. And I think it's very important to look at, what kind of failures are there. The really bad ones are when you see things changing and you are not moving at all. You are not changing. That's a major failure. Or if you see things moving in one direction, everybody follows. I mean, we've seen it with the real estate bubble. We've seen it in many other situations where people just did what everybody else did, and ultimately many went bankrupt. And I think there's also a very bad reason to fail is that you completely ignore the environment, you completely ignore your own capabilities or the capabilities of your people, and do things which are obviously stupid, like making a big acquisition without really looking very carefully at the acquisition target. These are really the bad reasons to fail, and one should avoid them outright from the start. Now, there are also the normal reasons to fail. You try hard, you do your best, and part of the assessment comes out as not being right. So you maybe get 50, 60, 70% of what you wanted to achieve, and that's perfectly fine. I think that's a normal way of life. You get things wrong in the environment, or the environment changes dramatically and you need to adapt. I think, as I said before, I think the important thing is to try, to make the right efforts, and then to allow for failure. In order to achieve that, I think it's very important to create an atmosphere where people do try, where people do take risks, and where it is perfectly fine, as risks are always, or decisions are always made under uncertainty, that you do this without perfect knowledge. And the key, therefore, is to really ensure that people really make decisions, move forward, and not get paralyzed by an uncertain future. So the key is to allow for trying, for experimentation, for taking risk. And I think the other part is to ensure that you support people in the right way when they're trying out things. And when risks or failures do occur, that you really talk about them, that people do admit risks and do admit that they have made mistakes and failures, that they are being discussed very openly. I think the worst thing is to just be silent. Nobody talks about it, and while everybody knows about it. I think it's also very bad to allow people continuously to fail and not to take responsibility and to feel accountable. I think that's the other major mistake, because I think trying, risk-taking always has to do with taking responsibility and feeling responsible and feeling accountable. So ultimately, the issue is when you try out things, you accept that a failure can happen, you talk about these failures openly, you challenge each other continuously, and you make sure that we do learn from our failures and hopefully not repeat them again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to come back to each of the panelists later and ask them, personally, what kind of risks have they taken and what have they learned from either succeeding or not succeeding in those things. I'll now turn it over to Jim.
If I could kind of lift this up one level. If you think about this whole GCF, it's around the entrepreneurship imperative. It's around, as you've talked about it, daring to be great. It's around failure and embracing that. Ernst & Young has the honor of serving probably more entrepreneurs around the world than anybody else I could think of. And in addition to serving them, we also celebrate entrepreneurship everywhere. 25 years ago, we began celebrating entrepreneurs by the acts of one entrepreneurial partner of ours who said, you know what, these entrepreneurial men and women aren't getting the credit they need in the marketplace. The big companies get all the media attention. And that single act has now led to celebrating entrepreneurs in over 60 countries, over 95% of the GDP of the world. So I've had the chance to meet all these entrepreneurs from around the world. Their characteristics are very consistent no matter where they come from. They start off looking at the marketplace and the needs that exist out there. They then have a vision to create a product or an idea to meet the need that exists. They then have the courage to take risks, to risk everything to chase their dream. And every one of these most successful entrepreneurial men and women in the world has a persistence to pick themselves up, to dust themselves off when things don't go well the first time, because almost every one of them failed in one way, large or small, the first time they tried. And so it is very clear that you see this. We will have a chance to talk about what can be done and what we have done individually. But there are some things that I think countries need to think about, including the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, when you talk about failure. There are many, many things within a society that can discourage and over-penalize failure. It could be tax systems that don't allow for deductibility of losses. It could be legal systems that file numerous lawsuits when anything goes bad. It could be weak bankruptcy laws that don't allow for fresh starts and reorganization. It could be labor laws that don't allow for the quick exodus of people when businesses are failing. It could be cultures that make it such that it's better not to have tried than to have tried and failed. So all these things countries around the globe are looking at. When I think of daring to be great, I think the kingdom's been doing many wonderful things. Over the last few years, Saudi Arabia has streamlined so many processes to encourage company formation. It's just remarkable. The number of procedures needed to open a business has moved from 13 in 2005 to 4 in 2010. The number of days on average it takes to open a business moved from 59 in 2005 to 5 in 2010. The kingdom is daring to be great in a very competitive field, and I give them great credit. We'll talk more personally when you get to the questions.
Great. Professor?
Can I have the presentation? Hi, my name is Nandini Vaidyanathan. I teach entrepreneurship and I mentor entrepreneurs. My company, CARMA, is an acronym for Creating Access to Resources and Markets, which I believe are the two biggest pain points for all entrepreneurs across the world. And at CARMA, what we do is bridge this gap by mentoring startups, mature enterprises, and family businesses. When you have an idea in your head and you want to build a business around it, there is a 50-50 probability, 50% success, 50% failure. Am I right? There are things that you need to do. And one of the things you need to do to ensure that the chances of your success go up is to tell yourself that failure is not an option at all. How do I make my success become more certain and my failure, the probability of my failure, come down? What are the things I can do, I need to do, to make sure that success happens? The first thing, for instance, flesh out your product. Very, very important. Understand the reason why you came up with this business idea in the first place. Try and figure out what's the pain point this idea addresses. Try and figure out whether you are the prime mover or there are other players in the market. What is that unique value proposition that you have to offer your customer, so that even if there are plural players in the market, customers will still keep coming back to you? Who is my customer? Very, very important. 90% of entrepreneurs fail simply because they take the customer for granted. They never know who their customer is. Very important for you to ask this fundamental question. Who is this idiot who is going to put his hand into his pocket, take his wallet out, and pay me for my product and not, to my competitors? What is the monetization model? In internet companies, this is a big disaster because most entrepreneurs assume that in internet businesses, monetization is equal to Google AdSense. Nothing can be more disastrous than that. Who is my management team? Go back to Bill Hewlett. He said, wherever you see good people, put them together. Because good people make great products make fantastic organizations. Estimate your resources and do the business plan. Don't ask a dumbass question like, did Bill Gates write a business plan? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether he did or he didn't. All you need to know is, if he did, that's why he built Microsoft. If he didn't, just imagine what kind of a company he would have built if only he had done a business plan. And of course, go to market, doing all your customer acquisition strategy, managing your online presence. In today's day and age, social media is a wonderful tool. It's not just for announcing your status that you're back to being single again. Social media is a wonderful customer acquisition tool. Now, you might say, all right, all this sounds really, really easy. I am 23 years old. I've never worked in an organization. How do I know how to do all these things that you have mentioned? On the one level, it looks commonsensical, but on the other, I don't know how to go about doing it. Your best risk mitigation strategy, go grab yourself a mentor. A mentor is a newly evolving species, particularly in Asia. Hopefully, will become more rabid and rampant in the coming years. What does a mentor bring to the table? Of course, he brings gray hair experience. But he also brings something which a young entrepreneur at 23 does not have access to, and that is network. He can open doors for you which normally may remain shut. Even as you are doing all these things, even as you are focusing on building a successful company, even as you are telling yourself failure is not an option at all, do factor this, that the writing on the wall could very well be failure. What I'm saying may sound contrarian, but please bear with me for a minute. Even as you're doing all the right things to build a successful organization, please factor this, that there could be a possibility that the writing on the wall is failure. In which case, what can I do to bring down the cost of failure? What is it I need to do to make sure that when I do fail, the cost of failure does not cost me my entire life? So there are 3 things that you can do. Number 1, be frugal. On television these days, whenever I see a new company going to town advertising, I tell myself, these guys must have been just funded, because they are spending as if spending is going out of fashion. Be frugal, be thrifty, be stingy. These old-fashioned values are good in business, even to this day. Listen to the customer. The entrepreneur has a perpetual umbilical connection with his drawing board. He can never, even for a single second, forget the fact that there is a drawing board and he needs to keep going back to it. He needs to constantly listen to his customer and make sure that he is doing what the customer is asking him to do so that he can go back to the market and delight the customer. And of course, build a robust innovation pipeline. I see business plans all the time where they go to market with just one product. What happens when the market saturates? Are you going to go back to the drawing board at that time? Won't you lose valuable time? So it's very important. You have an innovation pipeline with a version 1.0, 2.0, 5.0, new suite of products, wholly new diversified set of businesses. Good to go to the market with that. After doing all of these things, you've been frugal, you've built a wonderful product, you've done everything. But there is this one little X factor, which becomes a showstopper. And you have no option. At some point, you realize, I have no option but to pull the shutter down. You're at a crossroad at that point in time. You have two options. One, you can go back to being an employee in an organization. Not a bad idea at all. Believe you me when I say this, a failed entrepreneur makes the world's best employee. What it took you as an employee 10 years to learn, an entrepreneur would have learnt it in 1 year. And the biggest advantage to you as an organization then, if you hire him, is that he will hit the ground running. There is no induction gestation process for you. The second alternative, the next big idea. Move on to the next big idea. Just because you failed once doesn't mean that you will fail forever. Move on to it. But this time around, there is something you need to do. Look at yourself objectively in the mirror. Ask yourself this brutal question. Why did I fail last time? Anytime I ask failed entrepreneurs, why did you fail? The answers are pretty much standard. Oh, you know, I had this beautiful product, but the customer was an idiot. He didn't know a good thing when he saw one. Oh, you know, I built together a team, but the buggers let me down. You know, they didn't perform. Just when I needed money, you know, the investor backed out, and I couldn't raise the next level of money. And therefore, the company had to shut down. Therefore, the company had to fail. Not once in my lifetime have I heard an entrepreneur tell me brutally, you know what, Nandini? The company had to shut down because I failed. And I failed because I didn't do a lot of things I should have done. So look at yourself in the mirror, confront the brutal facts, and tell yourself, buddy, next time around, you ain't gonna make these mistakes. Pick yourself, dust yourself up, and go on to build the next Google. Thank you.
You know, I'd like to now turn to some questions, and we can go to the audience in a little bit, but each of the panelists here has been very, very successful, and it's probably easier to talk about things you haven't been successful on or risks that you took to become successful. What's a personal example in your business life or your career where you took a risk and either were successful or unsuccessful, and how was the process of you deciding to take that risk?
Well, you know, I would go just back to a few years at the end of 2008, just after Lehman crashed, and we were in the midst of a planning for 2009. And of course, you know, there's the feeling the world is coming to an end. So what do? Are you cutting back? Are you laying off people? Are you preparing yourself for the worst? Or are you saying, well, we move forward, we try to help our clients in these tough times? Yes, we are frugal. I think you made an important point, not to splash out money. And so what we did is to continue to hire people, to expand, and to really engage with our clients. Also, some clients who were really cash-strapped, we said, you know, you pay when you have money again. And we also cut back on nice things, you know, on traveling and meeting, internal meetings, but in terms of helping our clients and developing our people, we moved forward, and the bet paid off.
Interesting. You know, I'll be a panelist myself and ask myself that own question. When I grew up, it's funny. My grandfather was a shoemaker came from Italy, worked in a shoe factory, and my grandfather and father. My father went to the war, came back on the GI Bill, and for years, they said, "You really have to study. You have to study hard, and you have to be an accountant. You have to get a CPA." And I said, "Why is that?" And they said, because accountants were the only people employed during the Great Depression. And so I spent my entire, I didn't want to really be an accountant, to tell you the truth.
We're not all bored.
Not that there's anything wrong with it. But I got an accounting degree at Duke University, and I applied to back then there were the big eight accounting firms, and got offers. And probably the first risk I took was I knew I didn't want to be in accounting, but they made me be an accountant. So I said, okay, if I'm going to do it, I'd like to learn something about the world. So I had offers, I think, from 7 of the 8 firms, and I went back to them all and said, look, I'll take the job if you send me overseas somewhere. And that was very unusual in those days. I was 22 years old, and I had never been out of the country. I think I'd only been on a plane once. And one of the firms, 7 of them said no, and one of the firms said yes, and they said they'd send me to Holland and Amsterdam for 3 years, for actually 3 months. And then they let me start in Houston. So I said, fine. I took that one because I wanted to really see the world. And that was an amazing experience. And I got to Holland. I landed. I'd never seen Europe. I'd never seen the country. It rains a lot there. It rains almost every day there. I found out later. But that 3 months turned into 3 years. I never went back to the United States to work in accounting. I worked for 3 years because the office grew. The people liked me there, and I stayed and learned a lot about international business. So taking that kind of risk, you know, starting out in a position where my whole life I was told not to take risk, to get a CPA because I'd always be employed, I decided to take that risk, and that opened up a career to me, I think, in international business and kind of set me to where I'm going today. I also find that sports also teaches people to take risks, so I highly recommend, you know, being involved in either sports or some competitive aspects, because to win in sports, you know, you have to take risks. And to this day, I never forget when I was in high school, I was in a championship game, and I was a pretty good player on my team, but we had 2 other players that were great players, and they had both fouled out of the game. And so we were in double overtime, and we were down by 1 point, and the other 3 guys had fouled out, so I was playing with subs, and so I was now the most senior player in the game. So I got the ball at the end of the game, and first of all, do you take the ball at the end of the game? I took the ball at the end of the game. It was going in, and I got fouled. And so that was, to this day, I still remember this moment. There were 5 seconds left in the game. I was fouled. We're down by 1 point. And you have to go up there in the gym full of your parents and everybody. And I looked over the bench, and everybody went like this. And it was dead silence in the gym. And I remember thinking, I got to that line. It's like yesterday. It's 30 years ago. And I said, most people, they go to the line, and you're so nervous because you've got to make that shot to win the game. And the way it works in the United States is, if you're fouled, you get 1 shot. If you miss the shot, you lose the game. If you make the shot, then you can take a second shot. So it's called 1-on-1. So if you miss the first shot, basically the game is over, and you've lost it for your team. So I looked around, dead silence. Everybody was like this, and I dribbled the ball, and I decided instead of just standing there and being nervous and shoot it, which never happens, I took a jump shot. I decided to take a jump shot. So I jumped up, shot the ball, and it hit the front rim, back rim, and went in. And then I said, okay, this works, so I did it again. I jumped up, and the second one went straight in. And I saw myself being in all the newspapers and all the time. And I was very, very, very happy. And then it shows you the same thing happens in life. We went down to the other end of the court, and there was 5 seconds left. The other team threw the ball in. A guy caught it going out of bounds, threw it up, and I stood under the hoop as it went straight in, and we lost the game. The good news is I felt for the rest of my life that had I missed those foul shots, I would have never been successful in life, but I made them, but we lost the game anyway, so it just shows you, you have to go and dare to be great. It's always stuck with me to this day.
But Steve, in all honesty, I think yes, it has something to do with failure, It has something to do with risk, but actually it's not comparable with building a business. There are lots of basketball matches, you know, and of course sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. But I think what Nandini expressed in terms of, you know, being honest to yourself on major things when you have the responsibility of a business, of maybe of employees and so forth, that's, a different ball game altogether.
It is, but I think the aspect of deciding to do it. So for example, another example is going in your business. I was in your business consulting, and I love consulting. It was fantastic. Bain spawned from BCG. BCG is kind of the father of Bain. So I'm here back to my roots with the CEO of BCG. It's a great company. When I jumped from consulting into venture capital, I had a choice to stay with Bain or jump into venture capital. Venture capital takes all these things into account that you've talked about, because in consulting, it was always easy to blame a lack of progress on the client.
In the old days.
In the old days. Now they blame it on you. But for me, going into the venture business, you make the investment, and it's right there in front of everybody. If it doesn't work, you have to look in the mirror and say, it's wrong. And so you have to deal with this failure, and you have to be successful more than not in the same thing. So, what I've learned is exactly what you said is, you're going to fail at some things, but then you've got to get back up and keep trying. And the big mistake I see people make is, and I always say this to everybody, you've got to look in the mirror. You don't look in the mirror. People always blame it on the client, or they blame it on the not getting the funding, and you have to step back and say, okay, what could I have done better? Jim, I'll turn it over to you. Why don't you talk about your experiences?
It's fascinating how our backgrounds are similar. You're spawned from BCG. When you were talking about basketball, I played a lot of basketball when I was younger as well. And, either because I was in the right place at the wrong time, or the wrong place at the right time, or had the courage to take the risks, had two opportunities to take the last shot in very big games when we were down by one. The first time I took it, I missed. And I felt like just horrible for, about, a month. The next time was in the championship game, and I actually, made, about a 20-foot jump shot at the buzzer to win, and it's just a totally different experience, but you learn from both. When I think about my career, probably the first risk I took in a career was actually just saying to myself that I'm going to give my opinion, when asked, and not be bashful. Because, if I saw something in Ernst & Young that was, that either I didn't understand or I thought should be done differently or better, I'd speak up. And I remember one time when I was leading a small office for our firm, my boss, who was one of our vice chairs, said to me when he was giving my evaluation, he loved the fact that I was always telling the firm what it did not want to hear. He said I was, in his words, the pebble in the board's shoe, something that always makes you uncomfortable. And so that was just a risk I took because I wanted to be honest and true to myself. Later on, sort of the risk I took, I grew up in the center of the United States. It's a very different environment than New York or than here in Riyadh, and was asked to run our New York office and move to New York. No one from outside New York had ever run the New York office because it was a totally foreign environment, and there was a very high risk of being spit out. Well, long story short, it worked well. I was asked to then lead the firm, and then a number of very interesting challenges came upon Ernst & Young and really the whole business community. Shortly after I was asked to lead the firm, we were in the middle of a then recession, early part of the decade. September 11th, 2001 occurred. The tragedy of Enron and the collapse of Anderson took place. And we took a lot of organizational risks that have made us a wonderfully better organization. None more significant than actually, as Anderson was tragically unwinding, I spent month after month after month around the world actually, attracting and ultimately integrating 2/3 of the country practices of the former Arthur Andersen. It made Ernst & Young not just bigger, but much better as far as the talent that joined us. And it's something that, to this day, was it always popular across the globe? No. But it's something that when I look back on, it's a risk that was so right to take at the time.
Nandini, what about what's been your personal experience with taking risks?
I don't know why.
You take a lot of risk. You travel 300 days a year. That's
Yes,
taking risk
yes.
right there.
In fact, I don't know a life where I don't take a risk. So I don't know to mention an incident or, a bunch of incidents. But I'm going to say this, and that's, more, I'm going to deflect your question a bit. I don't understand why people make this big deal about risk-taking and why this association is with entrepreneurship. Two words which are always associated with entrepreneurs, risk and passion. I think both are overrated. It's riskier being an employee. You can get pink slip. Somebody can kick your ass out. Being an entrepreneur, the only person who can kick your ass out is your customer. But that is in your hand, right? I mean, if you do all the right things and you delight your customer, why would he be stupid enough to kick you out? Whereas in an organization, even if you are a star performer, just because your boss doesn't like you or the board doesn't like you, quite likely you will get kicked out. So I don't know why this association is with entrepreneurship. Similarly, passion. Passion is needed. I think in one of the earlier sessions, they said that very clearly. Passion is needed to live. That's the difference between a human being live and a dead body. So what's the big difference about, what's this hype about passion for entrepreneurs? And where I find it actually is a showstopper is most entrepreneurs take it seriously enough in the sense they are passionate in the ideation stage, but when it comes to implementation, the fizz goes out of the system. So what do you have? You have a damp squib of a company. So I don't understand, okay? But let me share an experience with you. I'm one of the FBI-trained negotiators. We were negotiating with a gun runner in Botswana, and a very charming, very superior intelligence creature. We were two of us, and again, I think gender intelligence comes into play here. My colleague Bruce from FBI was a very senior, very seasoned negotiator. I was a rookie. After 72 hours of negotiation, both of us, towards the end of the day, felt that he was toying and that it's only a matter of a few more hours before he will lay down arms. Something told me it wasn't so simple, but Bruce was convinced that in a matter of a few hours, the guy will call us and say, all right, I listened to you, you're the good guys, here are the arms. We went back home, nothing happened that evening. We went back home, and on the way, Bruce said, you know what, Nandini, I think tomorrow morning this bugger is going to lay down arms. Don't worry about it. We've done it, baby. We've done it. So I said, okay. But Bruce, I still think there is a problem. No, trust me, I'm senior to you. I know what I'm talking about. So when a guy is so convincing, you normally say yes, right? So next day morning, we walk back for negotiation. The guy is all smiles now, and he's looking at me and he's saying, yes, I listened to you. I agree with you. Arms bad. I lay down arms. So Bruce kicks me under the table and says, see, I told you. But I'm still waiting. The guy looks at me and says, but there is only one condition. So we both, bated breath, look at him. What is this condition? You need to leave this lady behind. I want her as my wife. How did I get out of it and survive to tell you the tale? I'm sure that's one of the many risks that I have taken.
Well done.
That probably is right up there with any risk anybody's taken there. I guess the other question is what happens in an organization, in your organizations, when something doesn't go well? What are your processes, and how do you foster learning from that rather than having it be a terrible experience and bringing your organization down?
Yeah, I think as we've said before, I think one needs to really challenge each other and really talk about what are the reasons, why have things gone wrong, and not to just say, well, these things happen, let's move on, let's forget. I think it's very important to talk about these things, not to rub it in, Well, maybe just to rub it in to understand, so that everybody understands what has gone wrong, that we can really learn from this. And not in order to hang somebody publicly, but in order to make sure that we all understand what's going on. And I think that's what we're doing. And then the question is, how can we support the one or the team that has failed in order to be better the next time. And also, I think sharing that experience globally among all the partners so that they learn from that. I think that's so important. I mean, I think I just want to emphasize what Nandini says at the beginning. I think to be brutally honest to each other, and I think that is the most important thing. When people don't admit failure, they say everything is fine. The worst thing is, oh yes, we had some problems with the market, but this next year will be much better. And then next year happens the same thing. There's something wrong. And that's why I think it's so important to be really, really honest to each other, and then to share broadly the experience without making this a public prosecution, but really making it really a learning experience.
Yeah, for us, it is so important to recognize that almost everything we do is in teams. And to realize that we all are making mistakes every day. We're all failing in some ways, large or small, every day. And when something fundamentally does go wrong, to really try to learn from it, as Hans-Paul said, to look at the underlying facts, to not get caught up in what is human nature, which is trying to ascribe blame, but to actually use it as the kind of growth experience it can be. If what has gone wrong is a result of someone failing to live our values or doing something that is just fundamentally wrong in a values-oriented way, then we have a very different reaction than if some judgment was made that the whole team agreed with that proved not to be correct. I guess the other thing that we look for in terms of things that haven't gone exactly right is when did people first learn it wasn't going right? Because one thing about failure is it usually doesn't get better with age. It is not like fine wine that you can just age and it'll get better. We have a belief that failing fast is a whole lot better than trying to hide something that went wrong. It is a lot less costly. It's a lot less damaging to a brand. It is more efficiently allocating our capital. It helps us innovate more quickly when we realize that early. And so one of the things we actually try to encourage people to do is if something's not going well, come early. Because no one of us is as smart as all of us. And if someone says, I'm having a problem with X, Y, or Z, oftentimes we can turn failure into success by teaming on it.
Nandini?
I'm going to tell you a story. I don't know whether this story is
Do you get married
true.
at the end of this story as well?
I'm sure she has lots
I
of
don't
those.
know whether this story is true, but it drives home the point that I wish to make, so I'm going to share it with you. Scott Lee, one of the CEO of Walmart, told me this, but I seriously don't vouch for its veracity. Apparently, I think many of you know this, Walmart has a reputation of being the world's worst employer. And you may want to guess, does somebody want to hazard a guess? What's their attrition rate? Anybody? Throw numbers, it's okay. The student community is this side. Give me some numbers. 25, not so high. 10%, not so high either. It's actually 288%. So when he told me this, my question was, what's the attrition in your HR department? Because I think it would be mind-boggling. Anyway, pre-Christmas, one of the flagship stores in Denver was hiring. They were looking at hiring some 75-odd people. The HR manager had just about finished the entire process of hiring when an Indian boy walked in and said, oh, I heard outside, that you're hiring. So I'm looking for a job, just got off the boat, so give me the job. So the HR manager said, no, buddy, I finished. So maybe come tomorrow, I'm sure there will be a vacancy. But the boy did not see the humor there. So he said, no, I need the job just now. This was, these were the days when Sam Walton was alive. And Walton walked in and said, okay, what's the problem? And the boy said, Sarji, I come from India, I need job, so give me job. I will come at whatever time you ask me to come tomorrow morning. I will work till as long as you want me to work. At the end of the day, if you're not happy with my performance, don't pay me a cent. I'm fine with it. So Walton probably saw a spark in the boy, and he said, okay, come tomorrow morning at 8:15. You have a 12-hour shift, and I will see you at 8:30 tomorrow night. Next day, Walton remembered this boy was supposed to come. He went looking for him. The boy had finished the shift, and he was about to leave. So Walton went to him and said, so, young man, how was your day? Oh, it was okay. You know how we Indians talk, right? Oh, it was okay. So, how many sales did you make? Oh, I made 1 sale. So Walton looked at him and said, you know what? On a normal day, we expect our salespeople to do 35 to 40 sales per day. Pre-Christmas sales, we expect 75 to 80. If you've done just 1 sale, obviously you're not good enough. He was about to walk away when something made him turn around and say, what was the value of the sale? And the boy said, $100,000. So it was Walton's turn now to do a double take, and he looked at the boy and said, 100,000? What did you sell? Oh, you know, this customer came wanting to buy small fish hook. I sold him a large fish hook. But that's not 100,000. No. Then I told him, you know, you've got large fish hook, you've got some bait as well. Why don't you go upstream and fish? And the customer said, damn good idea, except that I don't have a boat. And I said, don't worry, sir, we've got this fantastic boat, we'll sell it to you. The customer thought about it, and he said, okay, seems like a good idea, and he bought the boat. But it's still not 100,000. No, then I told him, you're going upstream anyway, right? It leads to a beautiful wooded area. Why don't you camp the night? And the customer said, bloody good idea, except that I don't have camping equipment. And I said, don't worry, sir, we've got this amazing camping equipment. We will give it to you. The customer then looked at everything and he said, my God, I seem to have shopped like crazy. How am I going to carry everything? And I said, sir, don't worry. We have this wonderful 4x4 truck, and we will sell it to you. So Walton asked him, are you seriously trying to tell me? Customer came in wanting to buy fish hook, and you sold him a boat, camping equipment, and a 4x4 truck? No, Sirji. Customer came saying he has a headache. I told him fishing was a good way to get rid of the headache. What do you need? Did the boy own Walmart? Was the boy the owner of Walmart? No, he wasn't. But he thought, behaved exactly like Sam Walton, like he was the owner of Walmart. What do organizations have to do? They have to build people like him who learn to own the roadmap, even if they haven't brought capital to the table. That's what you need. If you get good people make great products make great companies. Why do you need to worry about processes? Why do you need to worry about HR managers motivating the team? Gee, I think, you know, it's a double whammy. I keep saying this when I go to colleges, kill your placement officer. When I go to organizations, kill your HR manager. You don't need these people.
Well, I think before we open to questions, I guess I'd say that example is a good one. I think on top of that, what I find in organizations is many times people do what they think you ought to do. And it's no more apparent in sports. The sports world really teaches you this. At the Boston Celtics, we have a general manager who was taking some risks, and we bought the team 10 years ago and had not won a championship in 16 years. Huge, huge drought. And we brought in a manager that would take a lot of risks. And the one thing I like about him is when you're in sports, we studied this, in many teams, you buy a team, and then you listen to the radio, and they say to do this and do that, and the fans want to do this and do that. And so they don't take risks. They do kind of the generic thing of bringing in an old player, that has a big name because you won't be faulted for it. And I've noticed many, many times at the Celtics, Danny Ainge has taken risks. He traded away a very high draft choice to get Ray Allen to come to the Celtics. That led to us getting another player, and we ended up winning a championship. And that wasn't enough. We got in the championship the next year. We lost that. The following year, he felt we had a chance to win the championship. And toward the end of the season, he traded one of our star players. And that was hugely, unpopular in Boston. And of course, we didn't win the championship. So after that, everybody said, well, they shouldn't have traded that player. And we said, Danny made a decision to try to win a championship, to make a move to win a championship. We don't think we would have won the championship with that player. And he took that risk. And that's why we won the first one. And that's why we may win another one, because he's going to do it again. So the lesson, I learned on that one is most of our lives we spend trying to do what other people think we should do, rather than really looking at it and saying, what is the right thing to do? What is the right thing to do at this point of time? Have you seen that in consulting?
As I mentioned earlier, I think one of the biggest mistakes is, besides not doing anything, is following the crowd or following all the advice from from this or that side and so forth. And I think it's very important really to sometimes stick with your convictions. Of course, sometimes entrepreneurs have shown they stuck with their old business model, and they also brought their firm down. So I think sticking with your conviction is not always right. But in the event of the big recession coming, my conviction was there is a lot of business out there, and we need to build a team rather than to cut back. And while many people thought cutting back was the right thing, and actually many of our competitors also did cut back. We did not, and it paid off. So, but I think it is. The question, of course, is: are you taking a risk that really can bring you down? Now, if you talk about sports, and forgive me for saying so, it is not about life or death, even though sometimes it feels like it is. But when Nandini talks about the small entrepreneurs, who start, it's about life or death, of the company. And so, for us, it was not life or death because, okay, profit could be somewhat higher or somewhat lower. That's not the real issue. But for some companies, you have to introduce a new product, and you better go out there fast because the market is moving. And then I think when acting against when everybody else is in movements, I think is a big issue, and that is very hard to do. I think in a world when there is so much hammering coming up. As you know, I'm coming from Europe, and everybody says, I know exactly what to do to solve the euro crisis. And there's no obvious solution because there are at least 15 different exactly know what to do in solving this. So for the politicians like Angela Merkel or Sarkozy, it's very difficult to hold the thing together and still follow. Make sure that the different directions and initiatives are not completely falling apart.
Hans Paul, you said the first mistake is sometimes following the crowd. I would say a second big mistake is actually thinking that as an entrepreneur you have all the answers yourself and not listening. Yes. Not listening to the marketplace, as you said. Listen to the customer and what they need and what they are telling you, both by their words and their behaviors, and listen to your own people. There's nothing quite as empowering of your own people than just sitting down and asking them what they think, what they would do to make the organization better, asking your customers the same thing. What can we do to improve our products? What can we do to improve our services? I think it's fundamentally something that has to be central to any success.
And I also would add to that, I think trying different approaches in a small way, in different pockets, certainly for Bain Capital companies, entrepreneur companies, has been a great thing to do, especially if you have 10 locations and you can try something different, different customer service, yep, different kinds of offerings.
Incubate different ideas, try different... Well, experimentation is really key. Yeah. It's very key. Experimentation, piloting is rather than putting all the chips on one number.
And a lot of this, is about experimenting and persistence. I think Thomas Edison, who was one of the greatest inventors in the United States, probably before Steve Jobs, known as the greatest inventor in the United States, said he failed his way to success. He tried many, many, many things.
They said 10,000 failures. You found 10,000 ways not to make a light bulb.
Yeah, and we don't talk about all the things that failed. Even Steve Jobs himself, after he did Apple, he went to Next Computer, and that was a big startup. Lots of money went into it, and it basically failed. And then you got to be able to pick yourself back. I'll never forget when I was in college, when I was 19 years old. I was playing basketball, but I took up tennis, and I never played tennis before. And every time I would hit the racket, it was 1973. I was hitting the racket on the side. So I went to a tennis shop and I looked at the rule book, and it said that there was no specified size for rackets. So I had the idea. I went to the tennis coach of Duke at the time, and I said, "Hey, for the team, why don't we build a bigger racket, and I'll build a racket for myself, and then I'll be able to hit the ball on a little bigger racket." And they came back to me in a week, and they said, we talked to the players, it would be too heavy. So I was 19 years old, and I didn't really know much about anything. I was off the turnip truck. So I went back the next week, and I said, we could build it out of a very light aluminum material and make it bigger, and then I would be able to hit the ball every time instead of hitting the side of the racket. And that time, it took 2 or 3 weeks to get back to me because they thought that's a better idea. And they came back and they said, no, the players said that they couldn't turn the racket. It would be too big to turn. And then I dropped the idea. I was 19. Didn't patent it, dropped the idea. 3 years later, the Prince racket came out, became, and what I could have done is just wallowed in my pity. But I said, gee, next time I have an idea, you have to keep following up on it and keep following up on it, to try to be successful. So I think that, key to entrepreneurship is trying things. That doesn't work, try it again, but being persistent.
Should we turn to the audience?
Do we have any questions from the audience as we finalize here? How much time do we have left? 10-minute warning? 5 minutes remaining. So why don't we open it up for 5 questions?
First of all, can you hear me?
The microphone not working?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
it's working. It's a very interesting panel discussion, and love
Can you
your
put that a
story.
little closer?
Can you hear me?
Yes, now.
Okay. I said very interesting panel discussion, and I love your stories, Professor. I have 2 questions about risk management. Is it working? The first question is, you spoke about risk as an entrepreneur. What about people who are investing in entrepreneurs? What are the risks that they should keep in mind? And at the same time, the idea that they believe in, how to move forward with it when it comes to that side. Another question is, we all know that a lot of job creation in the region will happen through entrepreneurs, but there's a lot of risk, and there's a lot of changes in a lot of countries, like Libya, Tunisia, and Egypt. And an entrepreneur in such country would think about what's happening in the government, what's happening in the private sector, and all the investments that are holding, waiting to see what's going to come out of it, and all the revising of all the policies that are happening around. What advice would you give an entrepreneur that is looking at this environment? Thank you.
Steve, maybe as a venture capitalist, you might be the person.
Yeah,
the first
I would say that we look at many entrepreneurs, and I think that the first thing is you have to find someone you can trust. So that's a fundamental across all of them. Someone who is if things go bad, they tell you they're going bad. If things go well, they tell you they're going well. If you don't have a good level of trust, and certainly we found that even more important as we've expanded Bain Capital into China, into India. We have to have very good partners there that you trust. But that also works for the United States. It's almost universal that you have to find someone who you can trust your money with.
And many of the VCs will back the same entrepreneur on multiple different endeavors for that exact reason.
We've done it ourselves. We've had people that have been successful 2 and 3 times because you find someone you can trust. And then the second thing is you have to what the professor talked about. You have to figure out, are they meeting a customer need? Do you think they can grow a business that's really meeting a true customer need? You won't have it exactly, but you have to have a concept of will this product or service, how big can it be? And Bain kind of pioneered, I think doing a lot of analytical work to say, does this product, do something better in the marketplace than the other products, or will this service, hit? And then thirdly, as an investor, which probably maybe is just as important as the other two things, is we've realized, and I've realized early in the game, you're not always going to be right. You're not going to be right on the trust factor. You're not going to be right on the market factor. So when I've done individual investments myself, you can have a very, very high failure rate. The reason I like venture capital is we have a portfolio. And with that kind of analysis, we can be right 6 out of 10 times or 7 out of 10 times. If you only do 1 or 2 investments, given those odds, there's a good chance, most of them don't work. So you've got to have a portfolio and then really allocate your resources and times to the ones that are working and try to help the ones that aren't working, but quickly, realize what's taking off and invest into those kind of things. So having a portfolio is very, very important.
Real quickly, as someone else is going to ask a question, they want one more question, but to your comment about Libya and the other economies in the region, I think it's actually a wonderful time because entrepreneurs are all out there meeting needs in society. And in these economies throughout Middle East and Northern Africa, there are demonstrable needs that are coming up that are different than they have been before. And I think it creates an open field for entrepreneurial men and women to find great success.
And if you're already there, stick it out, I would say, and then get in touch with the new government and to get an understanding of what the playing field is. But I think withdrawing now and giving up all the previous investments would be a big mistake.
Another question?
Yes. Good evening. Is there a process or a methodology or a practice where you can measure your career development as an employee versus your chances as entrepreneur?
That's a great question. As the professor was talking, certainly, why don't you take that one?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
How can you measure your chances of success of being an employee versus being an entrepreneur?
Okay, I can
elaborate. We might answer that differently. To me, it is risky to be an entrepreneur because you have all your eggs in one basket. You're starting something up. The real success rate of entrepreneurial ventures is something like 2 out of 10. But you have to take that shot many times. So to me, it is riskier to be an entrepreneur than be in an organization. But why don't you take that, Nandini?
First of all, I don't subscribe to the theory that you have to be born an entrepreneur. You're a born human being. That's it. I refuse to believe that something as important as entrepreneurship can be left to the whims and caprice of a DNA. Whether you choose to be an employee or an entrepreneur, I think the primary mandate to yourself is, whatever I do, I will do to the best of my capability. That has to be your starting point. So, if that is your mandate in life, whether you learn music or start a new company or work under a boss, you will pretty much be a good guy. When they come to box you up at the end of the day, you will be the good guy. I don't think there is going to be a problem at all. Having said that, I think some people are born entrepreneurs in the sense, I met a 16-year-old once, and I asked him, why do you want to be an entrepreneur? And he said, since I was 10, I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And I said, ooh, how did you know that? And he gave me a dirty look and he said, not being an entrepreneur is not an option at all. So, I guess he was one of those born ones, okay? But I'm not sure that if you are a good entrepreneur, it disqualifies you from being a good employee or vice versa. I've heard all kinds of reasons why people want to be entrepreneurs. And one of the reasons is that I will never make a good employee because I can never work under somebody. Now that reason sucks to me, So, I don't know whether I've answered your question, but I really don't think the two are dichotomous. You can be both, is my point.
I agree. Now, we've got to wrap up now. I want to thank the great panelists here. Thank you very much. Get a round of applause for the panelists.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you very much. Thanks, you.
Stan.
And I'll leave us with a quote from Robert Kennedy, which kind of sums this up. He said that only those who dare to fail greatly can ever achieve greatness. I think that's what we've talked about today. So go out there and take some risks and make things happen. Thank you very much.
Tell me, head to the plenary room. Yes, sir.